Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, February 14th, 2025. The FAIRtax, the battle of democracy versus bureaucracy. This week's Chairman's Report is guest written by Jade Walle, a practicing CPA who has been on the Americans for Fair Taxation Board of Directors. The news is perpetually showcasing the terms democracy and bureaucracy in recent years. Now, if these two diametrically opposed terms are so important to the country's ongoing news cycle, it's useful to see how our current income tax system and the fair tax would integrate into this lexicon. Now, Merriam-Webster defines bureaucracy as a body of non-elected government officials. It offers another definition, a system of administration marked by officialism, red tape, and proliferation. Democracy is defined as government by the people, the rule of the majority. Well, while the U.S. is not technically a democracy, but rather a representative republic, we can use the term democracy loosely enough for our discussion today. So, how would we categorize the income tax and the fair tax under these two terms? First, what does our IRS currently look like? According to a January 9, 2025 Federal News Network article by Jory Heckman, the IRS workforce has surpassed 100,000 employees. Now, that's a level that's not occurred in more than 30 years. Now, how does our current income tax system collect our nation's treasury receipts? Well, the collection system is generally an on-your-honor collection system where over 200 million U.S. households and businesses self-report their various income sources and expense deductions, all while following over 75,000 pages of tax code, regulations, and guidance, totaling over 2.4 million words that everyone in the U.S. is responsible for understanding and accurately applying as they self-report their income on long, complicated forms called tax returns. Furthermore, a 7.65% payroll tax is withheld and collected from all working Americans, while their employers also pay a matching 7.65% to the government on every working employee. Now, virtually all of over 20 million people residing unlawfully in the United States do not file these required tax returns or pay any federal income tax. Lastly, over $1 trillion each year is lost to illegal tax evasion. Now, this is money that our current tax laws and regulations say we should collect, but somehow it just never finds its way into the Treasury. So the question as to whether this behemoth described above sounds like a bureaucracy or democracy doesn't even pass the laugh test. The IRS, the income tax system, is the height of non-elected government officials exercising outsized control over the U.S. citizenry. Laws passed by Congress are then metamorphosized into volumes of detailed tax regulations that you and I must follow down to the last footnote on the last page. Furthermore, tax courts with unelected judges make binding rulings when the thousands of pages of tax regulations are not clear enough and when conflicts arise, and of course, these rulings then become part of the universe of laws, regulations, interpretations, and rulings that must be adhered to. Well, I don't think any reader could see the income tax and the IRS as anything other than massive bureaucracy. Now, what about the fair tax, though? The fair tax is a little over 100 pages as outlined in H.R. 25. The fair tax requires no tax returns. There are no payroll taxes that are withheld from U.S. employees. There are no federal income taxes withheld from U.S. employees. This allows our U.S. workers to keep their entire paycheck free of withholding or payroll taxes. U.S. employers are no longer penalized when they hire more employees. Only retail businesses, which comprise a very small percentage of all businesses, will collect and remit the fair tax. They'll use the same systems that they already have in place to collect state sales taxes. Now, there will be no more tax filings for the over 90% of the U.S. businesses that sell products and services to other businesses. In other words, that are not retail businesses. Under the fair tax, U.S. residents will pay into the U.S. Treasury without even thinking about it. They'll pay their federal taxes as they consume new retail goods and services. Now, a unique feature of the fair tax is the prebate, which untaxes consumption up to the poverty level. This effectively makes the fair tax voluntary, as only purchases of new items beyond that required to live are taxed. Plus, no difficult or often overlooked tax regulations are necessary to protect the working poor. The prebate keeps the 23% fair tax rate paid at the register effectively lower. Currently, over 70% of U.S. families make and spend $80,000 a year or less. Those families would pay an effective rate of 11.5% or less with the fair tax. The fair tax elegantly taxes the over 20 million people illegally residing in the United States. Now, they don't file 1040 forms with the IRS, but they do go to the grocery store and buy clothes, cars, coffee, and candy corn. Now, if this drastic reduction in illegal tax evasion wasn't enough, people residing in the U.S. illegally will not receive the prebate. That means they'll be paying the full 23% rate on every purchase instead of an 11.5% rate that our U.S. citizens pay if they're earning and spending $80,000 a year or less. Wow! Now, studies have shown that overall illegal tax evasion drastically falls under the fair tax relative to the income tax. As the Disney Plus character Khalil in The Mandalorian says, "I have spoken." The income tax and the fair tax accomplish the same goal of funding the U.S. Treasury, but they achieve this objective in vastly different ways. Now, how would you categorize each tax system? Democracy or bureaucracy? In conclusion, Jade's analysis clearly points out that the income payroll tax system is a major part of the bureaucracy that exists only for the benefit of the elites and the rest of the bureaucracy. Now, many of you have labored tirelessly for freedom from the federal income tax and the IRS. You deserve a great deal of credit for your efforts to educate the American people on the need to fund the American government in a way that's good for America and returns freedom to the American people. It's imperative, though, that we don't replace the current income tax and the IRS with an alternative system that can still be manipulated by the ruling elite. We must let Congress and the President know the best way to replace the income tax and the IRS is with the fair tax. Now, make no mistake about it. The fair tax is a grave threat to the ruling elites. It will strip them of their power and their ability to control us through the tax system. Their opposition to the fair tax will be fierce and unrelenting. And don't think for an instant they won't use half-truths, deception, and downright lies in their desperate attempt to hang on to their power. However, with the support of this president, we can finally eliminate the income tax and the IRS. Now, of course, the best course of action is not only to repeal the income tax and abolish the IRS, but also to repeal the 16th Amendment so no future administration can ever shackle the American people with an income tax again. We must all come together and ensure that real tax reform, the fair tax, is not subverted by the elites in D.C. It will take the diligent efforts from all of us. We need your financial assistance and we need your grassroots assistance. Now, if you have contacts that will allow us to get more information to President Trump about the fair tax, please let us know. Please email us at info@fairtax.org and we'll give you some options on how you can best help us. At a minimum, please call your congressional representative and ask if he or she supports the fair tax. If so, thank him or her for their support and suggest they become a co-sponsor of H.R. 25 if they're not one already. If not, ask why not. Now, if your representative claims to be unfamiliar with the fair tax, offer to have someone come to their office and explain it to them. The solution: pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? They won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it about time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Help bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or actually investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the FAIR tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.